It was just another ordinary day at one of the city's most prestigious real estate companies. The employees were buzzing around, attending meetings, closing deals, and making pitches to potential clients. But beneath the surface of the high-rise office, something wasn't quite right. Some workers had grown too comfortable, cutting corners, and treating their roles like a casual chore rather than a responsibility. Little did they know, the CEO had decided it was time for a closer look. Marcus Hayes, the man behind the multi-million-dollar real estate empire, wasn't your typical suit and tie executive. He built the company from scratch with hard work, integrity, and respect for the people who helped bring his dream to life. But lately, Marcus had been hearing whispers of trouble, complaints from clients, unprofessional behavior in the office, and deals falling through without explanation. Instead of immediately confronting his team from his corner office, Marcus decided on a bold move. He would go undercover and experience firsthand what was really going on within his own company. The next morning, Marcus walked into his office building, but not in the way his employees were used to seeing him. Dressed in simple clothes with a clipboard in hand, he posed as a temp worker hired to observe operations for efficiency purposes. The employees barely noticed him as he quietly sat in on meetings, observed interactions between managers and staff, and even shadowed the receptionist for a few hours. What Marcus discovered shocked him. Some employees were gossiping instead of working, brushing off important calls, and showing complete disrespect to clients. One manager, in particular, stood out for his arrogance and dismissive attitude, bragging about how easy it was to get away with doing the bare minimum because the boss never pays attention anyway. Marcus stayed calm, taking note of every conversation and interaction. He wanted to see who was truly dedicated to the company's mission and who was simply riding the wave of success without contributing. As the day went on, one employee's small act of kindness caught his attention. A young agent stayed late to help a struggling colleague with a tough client issue. It was a reminder to Marcus that not everyone had lost the company's original values. Still, the level of entitlement and laziness among certain staff members was undeniable. The next day, Marcus returned, not as a silent observer, but as the commanding CEO his team hadn't seen in a while. And what happened next? Let's just say some employees had no idea their time was up. Keep watching to find out how this undercover mission led to major changes and some unexpected revelations. The next morning, the atmosphere in the office was business as usual, phone lines buzzing, deals being negotiated, and employees chatting casually between tasks. No one expected what was about to happen. Marcus walked through the glass doors, this time dressed sharply in a tailored suit, looking every bit like the powerful CEO he was. But his calm demeanor masked the storm brewing inside. He had seen enough during his undercover day to realize that some drastic changes needed to be made. The employees glanced up briefly as he entered, some offering polite nods, unaware of the bombshell he was carrying. The same manager who had boasted about cutting corners strutted confidently across the floor, completely oblivious to the fact that Marcus had witnessed his arrogant behavior firsthand. A few agents huddled by the coffee machine, still gossiping about office drama instead of preparing for client calls. Marcus took a slow walk through the office, observing everything with fresh eyes. This time, every missed detail stood out. A few empty desks during work hours, unfiled paperwork piling up in the corner, and a distinct lack of urgency in the team's energy. It was a far cry from the disciplined and driven environment he had once built. But Marcus also noticed something else. Amid the chaos, there were still employees who genuinely cared. He spotted that same young agent from the previous day, already at her desk, making a follow-up call to a client. She spoke with professionalism and warmth, her dedication clear even from a distance. It gave Marcus hope that not all was lost, but it also made the behavior of others even more unacceptable. As he made his way toward the executive meeting room, whispers started spreading across the office floor. "Is there a big announcement today?" one employee asked nervously. "Why does Marcus look so serious?" another murmured. The unease grew as people realized the CEO's unexpected presence wasn't just a casual visit. Inside the meeting room, Marcus took a deep breath and reviewed the notes he had jotted down during his undercover day. The names of employees who had shown blatant disregard for their roles were circled in red. The evidence was undeniable, and Marcus knew what needed to be done. The next steps wouldn't be easy. Lead. The energy in the office shifted dramatically after Marcus's unexpected arrival. Employees whispered in hushed tones, speculating about what was happening. Some brushed it off as routine, assuming he was there for a quarterly check-in, while others, particularly those who had grown too comfortable, felt an uneasy knot forming in their stomachs. Marcus didn't waste any time. After reviewing his notes one last time, he called a surprise meeting with the entire office. As people filed into the room, the tension was palpable. The same manager who had bragged about slacking off entered with a smug expression, oblivious to what was coming. Meanwhile, the dedicated young agent sat near the back, quietly observing everything, her brow furrowed in curiosity. "I want to thank everyone for coming on such short notice," Marcus began, his voice steady but firm. "Yesterday, I spent time in this office, not as your CEO, but as an observer. What I saw was eye-opening." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The room fell silent, with a few nervous glances exchanged. Marcus continued, "Some of you are the reason this company continues to thrive. Your hard work and dedication haven't gone unnoticed. But others," he scanned the room, locking eyes with a few employees who now looked visibly uncomfortable. "Let's just say I was disappointed." The silence grew heavier. Those who knew they had been slacking suddenly found it hard to meet his gaze. Marcus spoke about the company's core values: respect, accountability, and a relentless drive for excellence. "We built this business by treating clients and colleagues with professionalism and care. If anyone here has forgotten that, let me remind you, this isn't just a job. It's a responsibility." The message was clear, changes were coming. But Marcus wasn't going to reveal everything just yet. He wanted to see how people reacted, who would step up, and who would crumble under the pressure. Later that afternoon, the office buzzed with nervous energy. Employees whispered theories about who might be on the chopping block. Some scrambled to look busy, suddenly aware of how visible their performance had become. The young agent, however, stayed calm, focusing on her work without distraction. In a quiet corner, Marcus observed it all, noting how people responded to the looming uncertainty. He wasn't just looking for those who had failed the company, but also for the hidden leaders who thrived under pressure. The tension was far from over. Marcus knew the next steps would test the character of everyone involved, including himself. And when the truth came to light, nothing in the office would ever be the same again. The day dragged on as the weight of Marcus's unexpected announcement lingered over the office like a storm cloud. Desks that were usually filled with chatter had fallen quiet, the only sounds being the occasional phone ringing or the tapping of fingers on keyboards. Conversations had turned cautious, with employees wondering who would be safe and who might be shown the door. Even those who had been diligent workers were on edge, questioning whether their efforts had been enough to escape scrutiny. Meanwhile, the manager who had made a show of his indifference just a day earlier now wore a forced smile, trying to project confidence. But the slight tremor in his voice during client calls hinted at growing panic. Marcus, for his part, remained calm but watchful. He walked the office floor throughout the day, speaking briefly with employees, and observing their work habits. Those who had been slacking off the day before were now suddenly efficient, rushing to complete overdue tasks and answer client inquiries they had previously ignored. The change was obvious, but Marcus wasn't fooled. He knew who was genuinely trying to make amends and who was simply scrambling out of fear. By mid-afternoon, Marcus had gathered enough insight. He called for a private meeting with the executive team, including the arrogant manager. The room was filled with tension as they took their seats around the sleek conference table. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable as he began speaking. "I've had some time to reflect on what I saw yesterday," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And what I've learned isn't just about individual performances. It's about the culture we've allowed to develop here." The executives shifted uncomfortably. Marcus continued, addressing each point with precision. He called out the lack of accountability, the declining quality of service, and the toxic behaviors that had gone unchecked for far too long. Then, without warning, he turned his attention directly to the manager. "You said something yesterday that stuck with me," Marcus said, his tone sharpening. "You mentioned how the boss never pays attention." "Well, I was paying attention yesterday and today." The manager's face flushed red as beads of sweat formed on his forehead. He opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off. "I'm not interested in excuses," Marcus said coldly. "I'm interested in solutions. And unfortunately, I've realized some people here are part of the problem, not the solution." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Outside the glass walls, employees watched nervously, wondering what was being decided behind closed doors. The office was on edge, everyone bracing for the inevitable fallout. Marcus knew the time for change was now, but the hardest decisions were still ahead. Just as Marcus prepared to wrap up the tense executive meeting, a knock on the glass door interrupted the thick silence. One of the senior assistants hesitated before stepping inside. "Mr. Hayes," she said nervously, "there's something you need to see." Marcus's brow furrowed, but he nodded and excused himself from the room. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to breathe a sigh of relief or brace for more bad news. The assistant led Marcus to her desk and pulled up an email chain flagged by the company's internal systems. It was a trail of correspondence between one of their largest clients and none other than the same manager Marcus had just confronted. The emails painted a damning picture: missed deadlines, falsified reports, and blatant dishonesty in communication. What made it worse was that the client had already begun discussing a potential lawsuit for breach of contract. Marcus clenched his jaw as he scanned through the emails, each message adding fuel to the fire already burning inside him. This wasn't just negligence, it was outright deception. He knew this revelation would escalate the situation beyond simple performance issues. The reputation of his company, something he had spent years carefully building, was now on the line. Without saying a word, Marcus forwarded the emails to his personal account and thanked the assistant for bringing them to his attention. As he walked back toward the meeting room, a new determination gripped him. This was no longer just about cleaning up internal inefficiencies. It was about protecting the very foundation of the business. Re-entering the room, Marcus's expression was unreadable, but the air grew noticeably heavier. The executive sat up straighter, sensing a shift in his demeanor. "I thought we were dealing with accountability issues," Marcus said slowly, his voice low but commanding. "But it turns out we have something far more serious on our hands." He tapped the side of the tablet he was holding. "I just reviewed evidence that suggests a breach of trust with one of our top clients, potentially leading to legal action." A few executives gasped quietly, while others exchanged alarmed glances. The manager at the center of the unfolding disaster visibly paled, realizing the walls were closing in fast. "This is beyond unacceptable," Marcus continued, locking eyes with each person around the table. "And let me be clear, this company will not protect anyone who jeopardizes our integrity." The stakes had officially been raised. What started as a mission to uncover office inefficiencies had spiraled into a full-blown crisis that threatened the company's survival. Marcus knew the time for measured decisions had passed. The truth had to come out, and consequences would follow. The room remained deathly silent as Marcus's words hung in the air. The manager at the center of the controversy shifted uncomfortably, beads of sweat forming on his brow. Everyone in the room could see it. He was cornered, and there was no easy way out. Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady but sharp. "I'm giving you a choice," he said, eyes locked on the manager. "Either you take responsibility and resign right now, or I will personally see to it that you're escorted out of this building by security. But know this, resigning won't absolve you from the legal repercussions of your actions." The manager's face turned a deeper shade of red as he fumbled for words. I never meant for it to get this bad," he stammered, desperation creeping into his voice. "I was just trying to meet targets. I didn't think it would come to this." Marcus didn't flinch. "Intent doesn't matter when you compromise trust," he said firmly. "Your actions nearly destroyed a critical partnership and tarnished our reputation. There are consequences." Realizing he had no other option, the manager stood slowly, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'll resign," he muttered under his breath before walking out of the room without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, and the tension in the room began to dissipate, but only slightly. Marcus turned to the rest of the executive team. "This isn't just about one person," he said. "This is a wake-up call. From this moment forward, we are rebuilding this company's culture from the ground up. Accountability, transparency, and integrity will no longer be optional. They will be the standard." The executives nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the situation. Marcus outlined a series of immediate changes, including stricter compliance measures and performance evaluations, to ensure such negligence would never happen again. Just as it seemed the storm had passed, the assistant who had flagged the emails returned, her expression urgent. "Mr. Hayes," she said quietly, "there's one more thing." Marcus frowned but followed her back to her desk, where a fresh email from the same client had just arrived. His eyes widened as he read it. The client wasn't just willing to drop the potential lawsuit. They wanted to renegotiate a long-term exclusive contract, citing their admiration for how swiftly and decisively Marcus had handled the situation. Relief washed over him, but he kept his composure. This was the unexpected twist no one saw coming. A crisis that had nearly crippled the company had instead paved the way for growth and a renewed sense of purpose. As Marcus returned to the office floor, he looked around at the team, some still nervous, others beginning to relax. He knew there was still work to be done, but this was a turning point. The company had survived the storm, and it was stronger for it. The office felt lighter now, as though a weight had been lifted off everyone's shoulders. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, some employees exchanging relieved glances, while others quietly returned to their work. Marcus stood by the large windows overlooking the city, letting the gravity of the past few days sink in. The road to recovery wouldn't be easy, but they were on the right path. Later that afternoon, Marcus gathered the entire team for a company-wide meeting. The room buzzed with anticipation as employees filled the space, wondering what their CEO would say after the dramatic shakeup. Marcus stepped forward, his usual commanding presence softened by a genuine sense of determination. "I know this has been a difficult time," he began, his voice steady. But I want to be clear, this is not the end of our story. It's a new beginning. He paused, meeting the eyes of his employees. Mistakes were made and trust was broken. But today, we start rebuilding. And that's something we're going to do together. There was a ripple of murmured agreement throughout the crowd. Marcus continued, outlining the changes that would come into effect immediately. Better communication channels, transparent performance metrics, and a renewed focus on the company's values. He emphasized the importance of teamwork and integrity, reminding everyone that success didn't rest solely on the shoulders of a few executives, but was the result of everyone working toward a common goal. And for those of you wondering whether this company values its people, Marcus said, his tone softening, "I want you to know, your hard work doesn't go unnoticed. We succeed because of you, and moving forward, I promise you will be treated with the respect and appreciation you deserve." The room was silent for a moment before breaking into applause. Marcus felt a wave of pride swell within him. Despite the turmoil, the team was still standing, and now they were stronger, united by a shared purpose. Later, as the office returned to its usual rhythm, Marcus made a point to personally thank individual employees for their dedication. From the sales associates to the janitorial staff, everyone received recognition for their contributions. It was a small but meaningful step toward healing the fractures within the company. As Marcus returned to his office, he received one final email from the client who had nearly walked away. The subject line simply read, "Looking forward to a bright future together." Marcus smiled, knowing it symbolized not just the company's resilience, but also his commitment to lead with integrity and purpose. The challenges they had faced were tough, but they had come out the other side stronger and wiser. Marcus knew this was just the beginning of a better chapter, not just for the business, but for every person who had weathered the storm alongside him. And that, he realized, was the most important victory of all.